My name is Cristina Jurado. I am a science fiction, fantasy, horror, weird, and all things in between writer and editor. I edit the first bilingual science fiction, fantasy, and horror magazine called Supersonic. Maybe some of you heard of it. And we are here in this panel to talk about gender inequalities within science fiction and fantasy. And the name of the panel is called Evil Females. And I am here with wonderful people that are going to talk about this with me. I hope I pronounced their names correctly. Forgive me. Lucie Lukacovicova.
Nearly.
Well, would you like to?
Lukacovicova.
Lukacovicova. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. I'm a fantasy, science fiction, horror, and everything in between writer and translator from English and German.
We have Mihaela Perkovic.
Perkovic, also close.
Close.
Hi, I'm a Croatian author. I write in all genres, and I also do copywriting, and I run conventions in my spare time. Currently, I am the head of hospitality at Eurocon 75, where I expect to see all of you.
And then, last but not least, Johanna Sinisalo from Finland. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, please. I'm a writer that also writes between genres, so I don't classify myself as a science fiction or fantasy writer, but I prefer non-realistic way of writing. And yeah, I'm from Finland. I think that's all.
I would like to introduce our audience to this topic by talking about our own experiences. I think that would be interesting. As writers, have you ever had problems trying to publish in your countries? Johanna, can you start?
Well, because I'm female, well, actually in Finland, the science fiction and fantasy fandom and publishing in that genre has been, in my opinion, very equal for a couple of decades. But I started writing short stories and getting them published in early 80s, so it's like 30 years from now. And in that time, there still were kind of prejudices and kind of that kind of attitude. I remember that the one lady, it was actually a lady journalist who asked me how it is possible that a woman writes science fiction. And I had to answer, that depends on in which body part do you think it's written with.
Lucie?
I basically never met with problems in the Czech fandom in the area of fantastic literature. I would say that in the Czech Republic the equality in this genre is very good. I encountered some problems in the circles around writing poetry, that this prejudice that women can only write this sweet, emotional love poetry about doves and sunshine and roses, and I just couldn't understand how somebody still can think something like that, but well, they do.
Mihaela?
I'm obviously going to be the odd man out, pun intended, on this panel. Croatia is a very small country, so our biggest publisher would probably, in a normal-sized country, be called a small press. I can't say that I've ever encountered any problems as a writer or as a con runner that had to do with the fact that I was female, but that might be because I come from a fandom that is run by women, which also means that more editors are female in the genre then male, and again, that would make me the odd man, woman out.
Well, my own experience is when I started to write science fiction, I couldn't point out many names of female science fiction writers. There were some, but everybody thinks about Elia Barceló. There's also from South America, Angelica Gorodice, but there were not a lot of names. I had a hard time finding names. But I knew that they existed because I existed. I was interested in writing. So one of the things I did was to edit the first anthology of science fiction short stories written by women in Spanish with my co-editor, Leticia Lara Palomino, and it's been very, very successful. All of you have the English version, which is Spanish Women of Wonder. It's in your packs. You can download it for free. You can read it. But one of the things I've noticed is that lately, things have changed a lot, and I wanted to talk about that because for the first time this past year, I was asked by an editor to recommend few names of female writers because he wanted to do sort of alternative story anthology, and he wanted to have equal number of female or male authors. And we find out that we had the equal number, 5 and 5. And for the first time, I saw there was a conscientious interest in having a balance list, because I think they wanted to make a point. They wanted to also open the possibility to female authors. In the Spanish tradition of science fiction, it's mainly been male until kind of recently. And now we have many more authors and new authors that wanted to publish. But until this past year, I didn't see this effort. And I wanted to know if in your countries, have you seen initiatives like that of all-woman anthologies or any initiative to try to give a space and visibility to female writing in science fiction and fantasy? Mihaela?
Well, the first fandom of Croatia was predominantly male, but the women who were in it were not wives. They were members who came together along with the men. And they might have been fewer in number, but I think it took them about 10 years to kind of be not fewer than the men. The most influential magazine that ran in what was then Yugoslavia was called Sirius, and they published equally among the translations female and male authors, and they also published female authors that were local, and by local I mean Yugoslavian then. So growing up I basically had access to female writers of all kind. And later on, when Yugoslavia fell apart, that particular magazine died, and another one was started, which was edited by a woman and then by another woman. And at the same time, the National Convention that I'm a part of launched a book. They literally wanted to create a space for the local science fiction, and what they did, they copied the Glasgow Eurocon. The Scots gave a anthology of Scottish science fiction at the 1995 Glasgow Eurocon, and the Croats who were there came home and promptly started launching their own science fictional collection, and that was done by a female and a male author. So our space was influenced by that, basically. So.
And you, Lucie?
Czech Republic is also very small, so our market is very small. And already for some time, for example, anthologies do not sell that well. So basically for some time we didn't think about it very much, but now I'm participating basically in a project for all-female anthology. And that thing is supposed to have 4 parts, which is a pretty ambitious project. It's supposed to be called a woman and the woman and a lion, the woman and an owl, the woman and a dragon, and a woman and a swan. And it is supposed to be all female project, including illustrators. So then, if you want to learn more about it, I will be here around. So I hope that it all works well and that these books will be published, because they're supposed to be even a hardcover and nice anthologies with known Czech female authors, and even the lesser known, to have it in a mixture to give the young rising stars an opportunity. So I hope this works out well. Actually, I faintly remember that once there is an anthology in which I have a short story, and somebody on the internet commented, "Oh, this anthology, it's called Song of the Metal Vials. There is the majority of female authors. I'm not going to buy it." I thought, seriously? But it was one troll on the internet.
Because
so
it was just women.
Yeah, it was not even not just women, just only the majority.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
But you're talking about a Czech collection, right?
Yes.
Well, from my point of view, you're lucky, because in Croatian it would be, oh, it's all Croatian authors, I'm not buying it.
There are some like this in Czech Republic. Oh, I don't read Czech authors.
I think this everywhere. I know that some of the authors here complain that if it's a foreign author, it gets more recognition. People don't value the same if it's a national, for whatever reason. Johanna, and you?
Well, about the question of Finnish female science fiction and fantasy authors, are they respected? They definitely are. And I think that just this moment, the majority of successful genre writers in Finland are women.
From all genders, or just science fiction and fantasy?
Sorry?
In all genders?
I think in genres, yes.
Genre.
Yeah. And how do you measure success? Of course, it's a different question. But for example, if we are considering how many titles are translated into foreign languages, the ladies are in a clear lead in that aspect. But when you go back to that kind of mainstream market, then I think it's quite equal, divided between male and female writers. But of course, there's always in every country, it still is that same problem, that male audiences read books by male authors, and female audiences read by both sexes. So somehow it looks like that you can't win in that kind of situation. It's kind of shameful to be seen in public for a male to be reading a book by a female author, something like that, which I really don't personally understand. And I think that the same thing as is in poetry, that the male audiences are thinking that female writers write about like emotional stuff and women's stuff and periods and their relationship with their mothers and
I wanted to talk in relation to this about being recognition in the sense of awards, reviews, etc., etc. I don't know in your countries. It seems to me, for what you're saying, that in Finland and maybe in some Scandinavian countries, things are very different from south of Europe, because in terms of reviews, there's very few reviews by female authors, even though I have to say that as editors, there's a lot of editors, female editors in small presses, even in big publishing companies. There's a lot of women involved, but I don't know if they are the ones making the big decisions, and I don't know if they're in the middle ground. And in terms of awards, well, in the last few years, we had 2 female authors Tamara Romero and Nieves Delgado, who were awarded the Ignotus, which is our Hugo, for best short story, and it was extremely interesting. And now there are more and more female authors being nominated, but it's very recent. And when I say very recent, I said for a few years from now, not decades or anything. And I wanted to know, in terms of recognition, if it's the same in your countries, Johanna?
Well, actually, when you started to talk about press and having publicity, then those stakes are going, back to normal, so to say. In spite of the fact that more and more female authors from Finland are translated to other languages, the most of the press goes to the male writers, still and definitely does. And also there is this thing, I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but I suppose it is. The female writers who get most publicity are young and pretty. And I'm not jealous at all. Well, and when there's a male writer, it doesn't matter if he's overweight or bald or dresses sloppily or something like that. It just doesn't matter because he writes well. But if you want to have a spread of in a color magazine, you have to be young and attractive, and even the female journalists tend to find this kind of young attractive ladies with their first novel or the second novel who want to have a kind of makeover with hairdressing and photo shoot with fashion clothes, that kind of thing. That has nothing to do with literature.
You, Lucie?
I was really thinking about this, and I think that basically the science fiction fandom is quite the recognition is quite equally divided. In the mainstream, it's more like you said. And I have recently read an article in a mainstream newspaper about female mainstream authors, and one of the first things which the author of the article mentioned was, writing does not increase the sexiness of these women. I thought, what has their sexiness to do with literature? And in this style, he continued, 3 pages. I nearly was not able to read it till the end. It was horrible.
And you?
I'm going to have all of you come away thinking Croatia is the land of dreams. It's not. I swear to God. We are very patriarchal and outside of science fiction, it's not like I'm going to tell you now. The fact is that we have 2 national genre awards, and one of them has been around for 20 years. And about 10 years ago, one of the Croatian female writers went to do a social studies year, women's studies year, excuse me. And within that particular study, she did a research of Croatian science fiction fandom, targeting specifically this topic. And what came out of it is something that I brag about a lot, and very, very gladly. It is that about 25% of Croatian authors in science fiction are female, and this is the ratio that gets published. This is also the ratio that gets awarded. So for comparison, in all other literary awards in Croatia, the female percentage of awarded women is 2%, although they are almost 60 among the published ones. So when I say Croatia is not the land of dreams outside of SF, really it isn't. Inside science fiction, something weird happened, obviously, and we have a very nice space where nobody bothers us. The anthology that I was speaking of started with a male and female editor. Now there are 2, and they're both female. And this is not something that we noted or commented on. We just took it for granted until this study was made, and then we started actually paying attention. For the last 12 years, the president of the jury, the awards, the Sfera Award, has also been female. I had to work that out now. There isn't a lot of projection outside of science fiction, so Croatian science fiction authors are the bottom of the bottom. They share space with romance writers, okay? Crime writers, there's a university professor teaching at the Zagreb University Comparative Lit who is a crime writer in his spare time. Therefore, crime writing in Croatia is pretty well off. But genre, as in romance and science fiction, that's bottom of the bottom. And it was a female author this year who broke genre, domestic genre, into the mainstream by being one of the 5 shortlisted people for the biggest money-wise literary award in the country. And again, it was a female author. And the other award that we have is about 7 years old, and I don't know any of the statistics, and what I can tell you is that it has a short story and a novel category, and this year, the novel category women was again a woman. So, not the land of dreams, but we're doing fine here.
It's interesting. It seems that in recent years, things are moving on. But I would like to know if you know or if you've noticed or you can pinpoint a moment or in time or an event that you think start to change things in your countries.
I think, so this is not from personal experience, this is just a hunch. In the Sirius magazine, there was, in the early numbers, a story written by a woman, a science fictional story set in the future where women and men colonized the planet and all the men died, and women proceeded not to die out but to actually manage to find how to not clone themselves but replicate without the men. And if you read all the old issues, they had a section for letters and reactions, and that particular story caused, and this is like late 70s, I think, or early 80s, caused an uproar because a lot of the men were really angry that she made a world without women. So if I could pinpoint one particular moment in Croatian fandom, both in fandom and in literary tradition, that kind of made an entrance for women and made the argument that women are equal, that would be it, because the editors shot every single negative comment down for months and made fun of the people who thought that women weren't equal.
You, Lucie?
I also don't have any data, just only the feeling that basically, again, as Croatia, we are small, and the different science fiction, fantasy, and all this genre form a kind of ghetto, of a literary ghetto, from which we are slowly trying to break out to reach to mainstream. And I think that slowly the development and the fight for the recognition of the genre, also we used to be Czechoslovakia, and then we split, so everything somehow got even smaller, and just to say, the Czechoslovakian fandom is still called Czechoslovakian fandom. We are, the science fiction community is still together, even if the countries are separate. And our main literary award, Karel Čapek Award, is still both Czech and Slovak, because the languages are close to each other enough. So that's how it is. And I think all these things helped to develop the equality in this area, which does not work so well for the mainstream literature.
Johanna?
Well, I'm not sure if this is any official truth, but in my opinion, the science fiction fandom and science fiction writing and everything was quite male territory until 1886, 87, something like that. I don't remember the exact years, but we had 3 quite successful Finnish science fiction and fantasy magazines, And one of those was published by an astronomical society, and it has been targeted to young guys who wanted to learn, of course, the wonders of space. And that's why they published that. And then they were a little bit unhappy with the distribution, and they were like considering stopping publishing that magazine. And then one of very good female friend of mine and I and some other people, we just like took over the magazine and started to publish it, and we were unashamedly women-friendly editors. And I think that from that point it came kind of it became a pretty natural thing to happen, like female authors, female editors, female illustrators, they all are like something that it's natural to be there. It was not, at first it was like an exception, and I remember some kind of pretty ugly, counterattacks by the dominant males who wanted to keep this hobby for themselves and their own boys' club. But well, after a couple of years, they had to admit that we are doing a very good job, and there is nothing very special about that. There are different sexes doing these things, and I think that the whole fandom in Finland is pretty equal has been from those days.
I want to add something that I forgot. We had, in 2006, we had done an anthology of the best novellas in science fiction in Croatia, and both editors of that were male. And they did us, again, a great service by going around and pointing out at every single event that they were invited to how women were the strength of Croatian science fiction, because when they went back 30 years and read all the stories, they found that the stories written by women had stood the test of time, and that the stories by men hadn't.
Wow, that's interesting. And I was thinking, because I wanted to introduce another topic on this discussion, which is precisely about topics that we depict as authors in our work in science fiction and fantasy. Do you think, what are the topics in your countries, among the female authors in your countries that are more interested in? For example, I know that in my country there's a lot of interest about cyberpunk. There's a lot of interest about how technology is going to influence our lives in the near future, even in the far future. And also, I would like to know if that's the same thing in your countries. If you can pinpoint one or two topics that are much more now being much more used by the female authors?
No, I wouldn't say that there's any particular topic. The thing is, compared to the number of people living in Croatia and the number of people writing in Croatia, we kind of have an inflation of science fiction authors. We counted in a single year that there were 100 people writing science fiction. So some of them had multiple publications, and some of them were just one person who wrote a story for a fanzine, which is a lot in a country of 4 million for a genre that is really small. That is a high percentage. We have a number of anthologies that are annual. The Sveracon one does a topic every other year, so the editors kind of dictate what's going to be the next big thing. And there's another one that is tied to the Festival of Fantastic Literature that we also have in Croatia, and they always have a topic. So authors, if they want to be published, kind of have to stick to what the editor's vision is concerning themes. But from my personal experience, excuse me, all authors write across all genres. I actually tried to get together a female Croatian anthology for this convention, and which is easy because there's a lot of female writers, but I made it too difficult because I compelled them to write to write about a female's position in space, and they couldn't turn anything upside down because they lacked the experience of being prejudiced against that much. So that fell through. We'll see how excuse me. We'll see how I do the next few years when Croatia becomes more conservative, then something might come out of it.
Lucie?
Thinking.
Perhaps
Johanna?
I go first. Perhaps I'm generalizing a little bit here, but I think that female writers in Finland write more than their male counterparts. They write more about equality issues, gender issues, sexuality issues, and then I think that most women writers who are very keen on mythology, they tend to be women. And in Finland, I don't know how special this is, but we have a very, very nice young generation, female generation, which are very keen to steampunk, and they are like specialized in that and are very good.
I was thinking very hard, but I couldn't think of any one or two topics which would be typical for our female authors. The steampunk generally is quite on the rise in the Czech Republic also, but it's basically equally split among male and female authors.
And where you were saying about the gender inequalities, I wanted to know if you could tell us some work, either in short form or long form, you could think that it could be interesting for us to check out because of its significance.
Well, when I was talking about equality, I wasn't...
or inequality too.
Right. I could recommend warmly a novel called Memory of Water by Emmi Itaranta, and it has been translated several languages. She's a Finnish author who writes simultaneously in English and in Finnish, so it's not translated work, but she has written the English version also herself, and that's kind of dystopian kind of story. And of course I have to mention one work of my own. my latest novel, The Core of the Sun, is a dystopian alternate Finland, where women are domesticated, they are bred to be less intelligent, more attractive, just to please males. And what kind of society then there is? Those examples for it.
It's in Finnish or it's also in English?
The Core of the Sun is available in English, in German, in French, and of course in Finnish, yes. And I think quite soon in Latvian.
Great. Lucie?
Sorry?
Can you tell us about any work that talks about inequality, either in short or long form?
From the recent, I can't think of any. No, I think it's not a very common topic. Okay. Basically, from the Czech authors, there is also, if you have gone through the materials for this convention, Dreams from Beyond is a small collection of texts from Czech authors translated into English. But I don't think that this theme appears there.
Mihaela?
The only thing I can think of right now is the story that I wanted to base the anthology that I tried to do on. And it's called Awake Among Stars by Tatiana Jambryszak, and if you Google it, you'll find it online. And that is the only one I can think of that deals with like gendered inequality out of Croatian SF.
In Spain, there is a very interesting story by Lola Robles. It's in Spanish Woman of Wonder. It's called She Changes. And it talks about a planet where there are 5 genders. It's neutral, it's male, female, and there's kind of homosexual prone to men and homosexual prone to women. And in this particular planet, what you see is that the technology, it's not very advanced, except the technology that is destined to gender reassignment. And it was very interesting to see that she created a world where it was absolutely normal to be and accepted by everybody, that all those genders were there. I think she explores that very well. I think that anybody who wants to read about what we're doing in Spain, in Spanish, this is a very good example. I'm going to mention also a story I wrote for an anthology. It's called Antonio Benjumea. It's just in Spanish, it's not translated into English, but it was. It has a transsexual character, and in an alternative Spain in the 70s, where technology is completely different than what we have now. There are no cars like we know, etc., etc. And when I wrote it, I didn't want to make a point or anything. It was just very normal and organic to write something. And this character who comes from the East Europe, and his name is Andreas. But Andreas could be also seen as a female name, and he cross dresses. And it's presented as a woman. Nobody knows he's a man. And then finally we find out, well, I spoil it for you, but we find out it was a man cross-dressing and considered himself as a woman. And I thought I haven't read any other stories that deals with this from other authors recently. I'm sure there are some, but I'm not aware of them, and says that not very popular maybe. So that was interesting to see that reaction from people who were very, very surprised to find out what happened at the end of the story. And I also wanted to talk about if you think that there's an interest in translating female science fiction and fantasy authors, if there's any difference between translating them in other languages, if being female, they have more difficulties, they don't have any difficulties. What do you feel in your own countries? Mihaela?
You mean translated into Croatian?
No, to other languages, from Croatian to another languages, English, etc., etc. I mean English because it's the one that is most international.
I don't know any numbers, to be honest, and I don't remember. So we did a Croatian anthology for the Eurocon that was held in Zagreb, and I don't know what the ratio of female to male was, which says a lot. We also do an annual fanzine English edition, and that always has both female and male authors. The biggest problem that Croatian authors face is either finding somebody who will do a good translation for free, or coming up with the money to actually have the story translated well. Other than that, I don't think they have a problem. I don't think we've come, if there's a possibility to have the problem, I don't think we've come far enough yet. Everybody who writes science fiction in Croatia is still struggling with the hurdle of getting translated, other than the people who are already, like the author you mentioned, writing in both languages.
Mm-hmm. And you, Lucie?
We have a very similar problem, basically to get Czech authors, any authors, translated into other languages, especially English. I think that I know about one male author or two in the past few years. Now recently I'm trying to write in English and to get some short stories out, me and Julia Novakova, who is also present at the convention. So
Hi.
there she is. We are basically trying to get to the English-speaking market via writing directly in English and short stories, which are basically dedicated for the English-speaking market.
Johanna?
I don't think that getting translated from Finnish to other languages, there's no the sex of the writer doesn't mean anything. And as I said earlier, that the majority of translated titles are written by women nowadays, and those two right-selling agencies that are promoting Finnish literature abroad, both are led by ladies. So I think that also makes it easier because there are no prejudices in the agencies inside them. And I think that especially with those female writers, the translated Finnish titles, the number has grown and grown every year, and they have gotten into quite big markets like USA.
And I would like to talk about now about the portrait of female characters in science fiction and fantasy works in your countries, in your literary traditions. Do you think there is an evolution? Do you think now female characters are depicted in a different way? What are the reasons? Johanna?
Well, I think that we have such a long tradition of equality that we really did not have that kind of old-fashioned science fiction traditions where the females were just object, or those big busted professor daughters who were those stupid persons who to whom everything was explained, you know, the scientific facts. Do you see, lady? This is how this rocket engine works. Things like this. I think the tradition of Finnish fictional characters, though those females have been strong and able and subjects of their own stories for such a long time that I don't see any kind of, you know, science fictional or fantastical tradition of female characters or any particular changed.
Lucie?
Basically, in the older works, yes, there is this stereotype of the damsel in distress and nothing else. But basically, the development was unstoppable, and now here we have are really nice variations. The female characters are strong and capable, or even written by female authors. Some of them are stupid and incapable, but that's simply the variety. That there are different people, different characters. There are female warriors, female scientists.
And also as main characters?
Yes.
More and more.
Course. Yes. In different roles, with different capabilities. And I have to say that I like the variety.
Mihaela?
Again, odd man out. All I can think of is two things. We have some male authors that really like writing women characters, and they do. And one of our most accomplished and, in my opinion, most talented authors, Darko Matsan, who is first and foremost a comics author and then a science fiction writer, it was pointed out to him about 10 years ago that he had written 2 novels than the last novels that he had written, and that both had male characters. As central characters, and he responded with a 7 book 7-book saga about for children where 3 girls are the main characters. So we kind of have this culture where you point something like that out in a joke, and the next thing you know is, and it's not just something thought of, it's been published and translated into Serbian and has won awards, and it's good, and it was just a passing conversation, and then 3 months later he's like, here, there's 3 girls here, give feedback, maybe I got something. So I can't say that if there was an evolution to that, again, I might be too young to have witnessed it, because by the time that I got on board, it was enough to say, look, don't you think it's weird that the last 2 books that you wrote have male protagonists, and then 3 months later, there's a new sequel, new series.
We've learned that Croatians have a great sense of humor. And I also wanted to talk about something that interests me too, is if you could, because I don't know a lot, I mean, I know Johanna's work a little bit, but I haven't heard much about the Czech and the Croatian science fiction, not yet, but now yes, I will. And I would like, if you could recommend a couple of books of female authors to anybody who could maybe read them. Could you think of a couple of them?
Well, the easiest thing that I can say is in Cheryl Morgan's Wizard's Tower, which is an online bookshop, there is the electronic version of the Eurocon 2012 collection of Croatian authors, not necessarily only female ones, called Contact 2012. You can look for that. You can look up Milena Benini, or ask me to spell it later, or I'll post it on my Twitter or something, because the novel that she broke out of science fiction into the mainstream award was actually written in English, published in English first, then translated, or written a little bit again in Croatian to break out into the Croatian mainstream. And there is an up-and-coming author called Maja Stadling who writes in English, and you can't tell from her name that she's Croatian. And also there is the Croatian fanzine called Parsek, where if you Google it, you'll find the site, and again, you'll find a number of editions in English. I think we've been doing an English one since 2007. And again, this will be both male and female authors, and you can pick and choose whom you like based on their stories.
Lucie?
Well, I would recommend the works from the younger authors, from Julia Nováková. She writes very good hard science fiction. Then now quite well known in the Czech Republic is Vilma Karlečková and her series Mycelium, also a science fiction. Basically, it will be a 6-volume saga. Now the 5th part is about to be published, and it's very good and very popular. Yes, thanks. That an excerpt from Mycelium is in the Dreams of Beyond collection. From the authors who were not translated, for example, Františka Vrbenská, she writes more historical fantasy style, and she's very good.
Johanna?
Well, I actually mentioned a couple of female writers already, but I was earlier today I was recommending a very good female young adult writer called Maria Turchaninov, and her books are also now in being processed to be translated into several languages. I think it's like 17 languages altogether now. The rights has been sold, of course. The translations are not ready yet, but I'm sure that if you grab one of her books, you are not going to be disappointed. They are very, very beautifully written.
I can recommend to everybody to read. It's a short novella, by Felicidad Martinez. It's called The Texture of Words, and it's been translated into English. You can find it in Terranova, and it's an anthology of short stories and short novels. It's very interesting. If you can read it, you're going to be surprised about this author. I also would like to recommend the special English issue of Supersonic that you can find also in the bag that it was given to you. Because we did a special issue where we translated different short stories written by Spanish authors, and some of them are female. We tried to have equal numbers, and there's a number of female authors there very interested, like Lola Robles, I mentioned her before. We have an excerpt of her short novel that's been translated into English. I think it's translated as The Diary of a Linguist, but I'm not so sure. The Spanish title is El Informe Monteverde. I also would recommend Felicidad Martin has another short story in that one called The Spacecraft Shepherd. Very interesting. Felicidad Martin, she writes hard science fiction, so it's kind of like it's very interesting because it's not a subgenre that it's very it's written a lot by female authors in Spanish, and I could recommend all of the females as well as the male. And I also wanted to talk about a collection of short stories by Nieves Delgado, who was the recipient of the Ignutus Award for short story last year for Casas Rojas. It's been translated as Red Houses, and it was originally included in Spanish Women of Wonder when it was first published in Spanish. And the name in Spanish is Alucinadas. So her latest collection of short stories called 18 engranajes, something like 18 wheels. And it's very interesting because she talks about the topics she covers it has to do with artificial intelligence, the influence of technology in our life in the future, etc., etc. So I would recommend all those female authors. There's many more, but as works that could be significant, I think those could be very interested. I think we just have time for a few questions. If anybody has a question for
If I could ask you something.
Yeah, sure.
I'm totally interested in finding some of the people that they mentioned. I didn't remember a single name, and I'm not sure how I would spell half of them. If we could just, each of us, write them to you on a paper,
Sure.
and then ask the Facebook team to kind of put it out
That
there.
would be very good. Yeah. That's very good. It's a good idea. Anybody has a question? Yes? Sorry, can you wait for the...
Obviously, I'm not a female. I'm from the United States. I've been reading science fiction since the 50s, and we had a whole raft of very good female science fiction authors that I was brought up on. When you were girls, did you have access to these same science fiction authors, females, from what is called the Golden Age?
Well, what I can say is that there were very, very few translations. When I was young, I didn't know how to read in English as fluently as now, so I wasn't able to really get to read. I remember Ursula Le Guin, but I wasn't able to, I cannot tell you many more names from that time.
I don't think Nancy Kress is in the Golden Age. But the series that I mentioned, they had this thing where they published not only equally gendered stories, but they also translated contemporary short fiction alongside golden short fiction. So during the entire 80s, everybody was interested in science fiction. In the late 70s, in Croatia had a wonderful way to overview the entire genre. On the other hand, I grew up bilingual. So I had access to a lot of books that possibly my peers didn't. So I read Nancy Crass, both Wrinkle in Time, the classics that an Anglo cultural circle would recognize as books that were significant by female authors.
I have to admit that I grew mainly on male science fiction authors, basically on Bradbury, Clarke, Asimov, from fantasy, Tolkien, of course. Yes, then Le Guin, the Earthsea series. Then again from my authors, Ember series, but mainly male authors.
In Finland, it was exactly the same situation in the 60s or 70s. Exactly the same names that you listed were translated into Finnish. But as soon as I learned to read English as well, that I could read English novels in original language, I started to dig out these golden age female writers. And they were, of course, very important to me and my female friends from the science fiction community, because they were a living proof of that a woman can write science fiction. Hey, it's possible.
Do we have more time for one more? No? Well, they're telling me no more. Thank you so much for being here, for listening to us. I wanted to thank my fellow panelists, and go for it. Read female.
Thank you.